Now, I mentioned earlier that today's guest is Dr. Justine Toh. Justine is a senior fellow of the Centre for Public Christianity in Australia, where she writes and speaks about the Christian faith in a secular age. Her particular interest is of freedom and individualism. The Centre has recently released a film called For the Love of God, How the Church is Better and Worse Than You Ever Imagined, which Justine co-presents. Let's take a short look, a short clip from that film. That'll get us into talking together.
Crowning these contributions to Indian education was the founding of Serampore College, established in 1818 to educate Hindus, Muslims, Christians, anyone, regardless of nation or creed. From the day its doors opened, a wide variety of subjects were on offer. The Bible, of course, but also science and history, botany and physics, Sanskrit and Arabic.
This is the first map of India published in Bengali. The trio insisted that, whenever possible, students should be taught in Bengali and Hindi. English instruction would only begin once a student had completed the subjects offered in their native tongue.
They wanted students to be well versed in their own culture's contributions to knowledge. It was a remarkably non-Eurocentric approach and well ahead of its time for its cultural sensitivity.
Some amazing things come out of Asia that leave us standing back, that they were way ahead of the time for themselves. Tell us how that interesting film came about.
Well, at the Centre, we try and be a gracious Christian voice out in the public, much like yourself. And to do that, we write articles for the mainstream media, and we sometimes will talk about the benefits that Christianity has brought to the world. But often in the comment section, people talk about all the evils of the church. They say the Crusades, the Inquisitions, the abuse of women, the treatment of slaves, and so on. It's a long history.
Which, of course, is true. Many of those
It
things
is true,
are.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we really want to have our ear to the criticisms that are coming from all around us and are in the papers, you know, like every day, really. And so we wanted to grapple with that history and face it squarely, and be able to be honest about the ways that Christians haven't followed Jesus.
Do you find that once you start talking with honesty and integrity about things like that people start listening to us differently?
Well, I think people are actually quite surprised when Christians are open about their failings, which to me sounds quite extraordinary because, you know, I go to a church where every week, you know, we confess that we aren't the people that we should be. And all the Christians that I know are like that. And yet the public perception of Christians is quite different. People see Christians as holier-than-thou, as judgmental, as standing apart from other people.
Tell me some of the questions that the film raises, if you like.
Well, if you think about back to the new atheist Christopher Hitchens, he said religion poisons everything. So we ask the question, does it poison everything? And we look at 4 broad topic areas. The first is war and peace. So we look at the Crusades, but also Martin Luther King's push for non-violence.
Absolutely.
In episode 2, we look at rights and wrongs. So we look at the idea of every human being made in the image of God, and how that grants dignity and equality to everyone, and yet how also Christians betrayed that teaching by enslaving people and using the Bible to justify doing so. Episode 3 looks at rich and poor, so the efforts of the church when it came to charity and care of the sick. We talk about Father Damien of Molokai, who cared for the lepers, and also Fabiola, who was a fabulously wealthy Roman lady in the 4th century, who started the first public hospital. An incredible story. But we also look at how the medieval church particularly hoarded wealth. And episode 4 looks at power and humility. So the idea that Jesus introduced the ethic of humility that we have in our world today as a result of his shameful death. Well, it was considered shameful on the cross. And yet if he was rising from the dead, victorious over death and sin, then that meant that what looked like an utter loss was actually an utter victory. So that really kind of upended our understanding of what humility was. The ancient world heard humiliation, but we hear greatness now.
As an evangelist, I've always been concerned that sometimes we need pre-evangelism, that thing that goes before naming the name, declaring the truth. And some of this may belong in that area, clearing the rubbish out of the way so that the truth can be heard in people's lives.
We really want people to appreciate the tune Jesus wrote. You know, he said things like, love your enemies, do good to those who hurt you. And he didn't just teach that, but he actually embodied that in what he did on the cross. So we want people to go back and look at Jesus. But in order to do that, we've got to be very clear about the ways that Christians haven't played the tune very well at all. You know, Jesus said, love your enemies. Christians said, actually, we'll slaughter them instead. That's the Crusades.
And just not only in the film, you do podcasts, you write articles. What motivates you personally in all that you do? I
am really astounded that I've been given the opportunities to do what I have done. And all I can see is that the grace of God is always there and always wanting people to know him and to love him. So I just consider it an enormous privilege to be able to do this work, and it's because of the grace of God.
And we use that word in describing your work. You're doing it against a background of a secular age. So it could be that our generation have the opportunity now to declare the Christian faith in a way that's probably different than the last 200 years.
We have a lot to apologise for in terms of the last 2,000 years. There's a lot to be grateful for as well. Like the church's efforts when it comes to charity is second to none, really. And I think in our age where human life is increasingly under threat from various quarters, you know, in terms of disability, in terms of how there's a growing gap between rich and poor, we're starting to value human life differently. And the Christian claim that every human is made in the image of God is an absolute bulwark against trying to diminish human life. So I think that is a very compelling argument for Christian faith in today's age.
As a Christian yourself and as a group that are involved in these things, the challenges that we have to face are very real. And perhaps the kind of things you're talking about is something that shouldn't just be at the centre or in universities, it should be in the life of every Christian involved in witness. Justine, I often talk about what we do for people who perhaps don't believe. If a young Christian is listening to our conversation, overhearing it if you like, and is saying, I'd like to get involved in this whole business of trying to understand the place of the Christian faith today against this backcloth of so many things, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say think, read, write, in that order, and you know, just throw around some ideas, toss them around with your friends, test them in the ears of your friends who share your faith, but also those who don't, and see if you can get a good conversation going along. I think that's a really powerful thing to do. And also to pray, really, just to say, God, I am putty in your hands, make me as you will, and think about the kinds of strengths and capacities that God's given you, and just ask him to use you.
I mean, having come very strongly from a Methodist background, heart matters to me, emotion is all important. But I do think we've got to discover the mind again, haven't we, really, in terms of the Christian faith?
We do, and that's also a good reminder to me to also point it back to the heart as well, because that's what really matters most of all, the love and the hope and the faith that it
And when those
exists.
two things can shake hands, then we've got something that really makes a difference. Tell us a little bit about how people can find out a bit more about
For the Love of God, yes. Betterandworse.film. There's all 4 episodes of the documentary are available online for purchase. You can also find out about cinema screenings. That's a 90-minute version that gathers together bits from all the 4 episodes. That is currently showing in cinemas right now, but betterandworse.film.
Justine, it's been a delight to have you on the show. We wish you well with this project and future projects that you might be part of, and hope you'll come back and tell us more when you've got new things that you want to share with us. Delight to talk to you today.